I, for my part, from the nature of my own life, advanced infallibly in one direction, and in one direction only. It was on the moral side, and in my own person, that I learned to recognize the thorough and primitive duality of man. I saw that of the two natures that contended in the field of my consciousness, even if I could rightly be said to be either, it was only because I was radically both. And from an early age, even before the course of my scientific discoveries had begun to suggest the most naked possibility of such a miracle, I had learned to dwell with pleasure, as a beloved daydream, on the thought of the separation of these elements.
Is that you? It is you! What a crazy coincidence. Wow, what a world we live in. Hello there, and welcome to Halloween. If you're watching this, hopefully it is October, aka spooky season, aka the best time of the year, even better than the winter holiday season. Fight me. And so in light of the season, I wanted to take some time and talk about one of my favorite spooky tropes, the evil alter ego. You know what I'm talking about. You got your Tyler Durdens, your Golems, your Darkipliers.
Just shut up! No one cares!
You get the drift. Basically, your character's got some other evil versions of themselves hovering around, and sometimes they do bad things. Now, to be clear, I am not talking about characters with dissociative identity disorder, or DID. That is a very treacherous road for me to go down as someone who doesn't have any medical expertise or any experience with DID. And so I don't want to go down that route. I'll link some more videos and channels on the screen now if you're more interested in learning about it. And even then, know that those are only starting points for a very expansive and complex topic, which again is not the topic of this video. And in the meantime, please keep in mind that DID systems are real people with real experiences and real trauma and are belittled enough by our society, quite frankly. So if you know someone with DID in real life, don't go up to them and ask them if they can turn into the Hulk. Anyway, when looking at these types of characters, there isn't really one set definition. I mean, the whole evil alter ego thing can be really literal, like with Angel and Angelus and Buffy the Vampire Slayer. One is literally the other, just without a soul, so literally evil. And of course, there's always the classic secret evil twin storyline.
You had a twin brother all along? That's the big twist we were waiting for?
What a ripoff! I predicted that like a year ago.
But the other far more interesting possibility, in my opinion, is the adopted alter ego. Less Slim Shady and more like an evil Batman. And then there are sides to someone that aren't necessarily evil, but you know, do signify a change in behavior and personality, if not outright an identity change. And so in this video, I want to talk about these specific character types, the characters that fit them, and what they mean. To start off with, let's venture into a topic that has very little coverage on this platform: superhero movies. Sam Raimi's Spider-Man trilogy is a cornerstone of 21st century pop culture and has maintained widespread acclaim and appeal among audiences for the last 2 decades. It's also dumb as fuck.
How's the pie?
Now, before you kill me, this is not a bad thing. I love these movies, all 3 of them, but it is important to acknowledge the silly stuff that's in them so that when the more darker and serious stuff shows up, it shows contrast. Spider-Man 3 is probably the messiest and busiest movie of the trilogy, with 3 separate villains if you don't include Sam Raimi's inability to write women or James Franco. But it does have one major theme that I really like: Peter Parker's dark side. You see, throughout the trilogy, Peter Parker is a very flawed character. And that's by design. He's got a bit of a temper, he can be pretty petty when he's upset, and he has a hard time considering the feelings of those around him, including those who he cares about. And all of that comes to a head in Spider-Man 3. So much of this movie is about Peter Parker's moral failings. His ego is beginning to inflate a little bit because of his fame as Spider-Man, which is affecting his relationships and causes conflict with MJ. He's like allergic to telling the truth to his friend Harry about his involvement with his father's death, and so Harry assumes that he killed him, even though that whole thing could be solved with like one conversation, which I guess they don't have. And then to throw gas on the flames, he starts semi-courting Gwen Stacy in the middle of all of this. He's not in the best looking position. Enter the alien symbiote. The symbiote is representative of a lot of things in this movie, mostly the power and adverse effects of corporate meddling, but it does play an interesting role in the story. When it climbs into Peter's room and vores him, it gives him a brand new black suit and a boost of confidence. While this makes him feel great and a lot of his problems start to seemingly be solved, it quickly comes to light that the symbiote is exaggerating Peter's worst qualities, namely his ego, his jealousy, his ego, his anger, and his ego. But because of those elevated character traits, Peter becomes almost unrecognizable. He's cocky, rude, and borderline emotionally abusive to MJ. He seems nothing like the thoughtful, reserved person he's been for most of the trilogy. But he's not a different person, not really. The symbiote has just reshuffled the intensity of his different character traits, and so he explores those different facets of his character with some rather dire consequences.
Who are you?
I don't know.
Now let's talk about another Marvel character, Wanda Maximoff, specifically the MCU portrayal. Now there are some inherent issues with how the MCU portrays this character, mostly relating to the character's cultural heritage or lack thereof. But it is undeniable that she has one of the most interesting character progressions in the MCU, though that probably isn't saying a whole lot. Wanda follows a progression of villain to hero to villain again, all while still having understandable motives throughout. Easily the most interesting segment of her arc, however, is in the WandaVision miniseries and in the movie Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. Throughout all of WandaVision, we experience how her grief at the loss of her family, her brother, her lover, and her children affects her, specifically her emotional state, as well as how her powers affect people around her because of said emotional state. It shows that Wanda has a side to her that will use her powers to make her happy, no matter what the cost is to other people, even if it's unintentional. At the end of WandaVision, Wanda has the most control over her power that she ever has in her entire character arc, as well as gaining access to the incredibly powerful spellbook known as the Darkhold, and she adopts the name the Scarlet Witch. WandaVision is a pretty good show, in my opinion, and more importantly, it's an excellent window into Wanda's mental state, and it gives a lot of depth to her motivations. Multiverse of Madness doesn't do that. However, I don't hate it. In case you weren't aware, Multiverse of Madness makes Wanda into a pretty straight villain, motivated by trying to find an alternate universe version of her kids that she can be happy with, using her newfound powers and knowledge gained from the Darkhold to obliterate anyone standing in her path. And when I say that, I don't use the word obliterate lightly. Man, Sam Raimi is really going back to his horror roots in Evil Dead, huh? But it's not completely out of the blue. It's sudden and pretty jarring for sure, but they do provide an explanation, essentially saying that the influence of the Darkhold is elevating Wanda's anger and is warping her perception of events so that it doesn't seem like she's the bad guy in her mind. It doesn't help that she was left alone with only her grief and what is essentially an addictive vice for months on end with no support system. You know, great job, Avengers. But you know, whatever. Anyway, she's a lot more dangerous and a lot less level-headed, but on some level she's still recognizably Wanda Maximoff. At least in certain aspects. But where am I going with all this? What is the point of me bringing up a couple of messy mid-tier Marvel movies directed by Sam Raimi? Well, it's because 1, I'll get 90% more clicks if I put Wanda and or Spider-Man in the thumbnail, and 2, because these are both characters that through factors that slightly shifted their personality traits, went from well-meaning heroes to despicable villains, even if only for a short time. They're also in these states differentiated by different identity factors. Peter is now Black Suit Spider-Man, and Wanda Wanda is now the Scarlet Witch, despite still both being the same person. But I guess one could argue that they are technically different people, because they both essentially had their evilness slider adjusted manually by a tangible evil-making element within the universe, i.e. the symbiote and the Darkhold, and I can see that point. However, they're just a jumping off point. What happens when a change like this is made without magical evil influence? Man, that segment title I came up with is pretty neat. Let's start this segment off with a character who he doesn't refer to in the slightest. The dichotomy between Batman and Bruce Wayne is one that has been explored extensively, both on this platform and more widely in the nearly century-long history of this character, so I just want to use them as a jumping off point. Batman and Bruce Wayne are the same person. Sorry for those of you who haven't caught up to Detective Comics number 27 yet, but there's always been this question of, well, are they really? Bruce Wayne is a charismatic billionaire playboy and a public financial backer of many charities. And Batman is a cold, swift vigilante who brutalizes criminals and sticks to the shadows. They're the same person, sure, but they're two different identities, different facets of one man explored in various ways. Now you may be saying, but TSD, Batman isn't an evil doppelganger villain guy. He's just a superhero with a secret identity. Why are you bringing him up? Well, like I said, he serves as a good starting point. And frankly, I've been talking about superheroes far too much in this video, so let's take a hard right and then just talk about something else, you know, Breaking Bad. No. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time here, but I do think it is pertinent to the topic at hand, so stay with me. Now, don't worry, there won't be any major spoilers for the series in this video, but if you don't want to take the risk, there's a time code right there for you. So, anyway, for those of you who don't know, Breaking Bad centers around a high school chemistry teacher named Walter White, who, due to a terminal cancer diagnosis, resorts to selling methamphetamine in order to leave something behind for his family after he's gone. Now, the point that I want to hit on here is that since Walt has to keep his identity a secret while selling drugs, he has a pseudonym for when he's working in his side business: Heisenberg. The name comes from Werner Heisenberg, the scientist often credited for the creation of the theory of quantum mechanics, a field that deals almost exclusively with uncertainty. Similarly, there's a lot of uncertainty between Walter White and the identity of Heisenberg in the show. They're similar to Batman and Bruce Wayne. Walt is the friendly chemistry teacher who would do anything for his family, and Heisenberg is the cold, calculating drug lord who will stop at nothing to get what he wants. Many fans view the series as Walt being slowly taken over by Heisenberg, as a good man being corrupted by his circumstances, but I don't think that's necessarily the case. It's hard to go in depth on this specifically without going into spoiler territory, so if you want a deeper and, more spoiler-laden analysis on this very topic, I suggest Izzy Iz's video called Why Heisenberg Doesn't Exist. It's a huge inspiration for this video, and it should be linked in the description and in the card that you'll see on screen right about now. But the SparkNotes version is this: Walt isn't taken over by Heisenberg. The traits that Heisenberg expresses were always within Walt, and they just express themselves more and more as the circumstances allow. Walt puts himself in situations where he is able to thrive, and to him, thriving is being Heisenberg, being that cold, calculating monster. Walt didn't become Heisenberg. He simply allowed himself to express his inner nature and ambition through an identity that freed him from the consequences of his actions. For a while. It's probably not a spoiler to say that things don't go super well for him during his tenure as a meth dealer. But it's an interesting idea, right? The alternate identity of Heisenberg frees him from the consequences of being himself. For Walt, it's a selfish power fantasy, but what if it could be used for compartmentalization? I know I'm hopping around a lot of different media properties very quickly, but this particular example is an almost perfect encapsulation of what I'm going for here. Darth Vader. I know, wait, just hear me out here. Is probably one of the most iconic villains in movie history, and his story is a perfect examination of identity compartmentalization. I mean, think about it. He starts out as Anakin Skywalker, this young kid who, while holding some deep-seated anger issues, genuinely wants to do good and has the best of intentions. But then come the Clone Wars. Then comes the Revenge of the Sith, and Palpatine declares him Darth Vader, servant of the dark side, something that Anakin becomes out of desperation to save Padme, the love of his life. And so he compartmentalizes the things that he does as Darth Vader and justifies them as necessary evil so that Anakin Skywalker can have a good life. But as you probably guessed, The story doesn't go that way.
This is how it feels to be Anakin Skywalker. Forever. The first dawn of light in your universe brings pain. The light burns you. It will always burn you. Part of you will always lie upon black glass sand beside a lake of fire while flames chew upon your flesh. You loved her. You will always love her. You could never will her death. Never. But you remember. You remember all of it. You remember the dragon that you brought Vader forth from your heart to slay. You remember the cold venom in Vader's blood. You remember the furnace of Vader's fury and the black hatred of seizing her throat to silence her lying mouth. And there is one blazing moment in which you finally understand that there was no dragon, that there was no Vader, that there was only you, only Anakin Skywalker, that it was all you, is you, only you. You did it. You killed her. It is in this blazing moment that you finally understand the trap of the dark side, the final cruelty of the Sith, because now yourself is all you will ever have.
Wow. If only the prequel movies could have had prose like that. But that passage is so good because it exemplifies what Darth Vader is when he's written at his best. He's all the bad parts of Anakin Skywalker. The anger, the recklessness, the misery, all cranked up to 11. Because now he can't accept that Anakin Skywalker is the type of person who would do those horrible, horrible things. And so, he killed him.
I am not your failure, Obi-Wan. You didn't kill Anakin Skywalker. I did.
Just like Heisenberg, Vader is an identity for Anakin to hide in. But in this case, it's not to thrive. It's to cope with his awful actions. Anakin was gone when Vader decided to accept his identity as the villain. For good.
Then my friend is truly dead. Goodbye, Darth.
Now, that story is nothing short of heartbreaking because we see it as an audience member. On some level, we are separated from the event, however, so even though it's a truly mind-bending position to be in, we on some level still think, oh, well, that's sad, but he would be so much happier if he just accepted his faults for who he was as part of his own identity. I mean, I don't want to speak for all of you viewers, but it's pretty easy to make that kind of observation as a viewer. But with my penultimate example here, I want to flip that script. Undertale is a short 2D video game RPG that came out in 2015. What even is this video, man? In it, you play as a child who fell into an underground cave system, filled to the brim with monsters who are themselves filled to the brim with personality. It's a fantastic game, and one that if you haven't played already, I heavily recommend. Seriously, it's like $10 on Steam, and you get like a 10-hour experience out of it, so... But the main premise of this game, the core conceit, doesn't really relate to the characters or the setting at all. The main point is that in this game, in this world, you're always given a choice. Whenever you randomly encounter a monster in this game, a la Pokemon or, other indie RPGs of the same vein, you're always either given the option to spare the monster or to kill them, and every single monster matters. Now with that in mind, there are three main routes you can take in this game. The first is the pacifist route, where you spare every single monster. This route is how you get the good ending and the end credits. The next is the neutral route, which technically covers a wide variety of different routes, but basically is defined by any version of a route where you kill some monsters and spare some others. There's different endings for different versions of this route, but for the most part it's pretty similar. Then there's the genocide or no mercy route. And I'm going to use the second name because YouTube does not like the first word. This route is characterized by the choice by the player to kill every single monster in the underground. And I mean every single monster. You have to grind every single area, going around each room multiple times until you stop getting random encounters and because all the monsters have been killed. It's hard and it's not fun. And that's by design. The game takes every single opportunity to remind you that you are doing this totally by your own volition, that it is completely optional, and that at any point in time, you can reset the game and start over and do a pacifist or neutral route. You won't be causing pain and distress to the character characters in the game. It even throws the hardest boss fights in the entire game at you during this route. You know Sans, the funny skeleton man with the funny Meglovania music? Yeah, his fight is the most comically unfair fight in video game history. And I mean comically unfair. What level of hell is this? It's essentially the game throwing everything that it has at you to make you stop playing this route. But if you power through, you can complete it. You can kill every single monster in the underground. And if you do, you're greeted by a character named Kara. Kara is, long story short, the ghost of the kid who fell to the underground a long time ago and lived with the royal family before dying in a flower-related scheme, and whose spirit has wandered adrift for years until you showed up and brought it back to life. Cool, cool. Anyway, when you meet with them, they tell you that you brought them back to life with your power, that you gave them a new purpose with that life. And what is that purpose, you may ask?
With your guidance, I realized the purpose of my reincarnation. Power. Together, we eradicated the enemy, and it became strong.
This text-to-speech is added in by me, by the way. There's almost no spoken dialogue in the entire game, and during this particular sequence, outside of the music, it's dead silent. Kara presents you with a choice: delete the world, or keep it around. If you delete it, Kara shares your sentiment and the game crashes. But if you disagree, this happens.
How curious. You must have misunderstood. Since when were you the one in control?
Now, it goes without saying that that's a pretty chilling ending. But the reason that I bring this up is because within the fanbase, there's this relatively popular interpretation that Kara is corrupting the player character and making them do evil things. But that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, because if that were the case, then why does it only happen during the No Mercy route? Really, that idea is another example of this compartmentalization. Think about it. If one chooses to go down this route, then they are actively making the choice to murder all of these different characters who presumably you've become acquainted with in your previous playthroughs. To get the sequence at all, the player chooses to go down this route until the very end. The player is the one who made every single choice to go down this grueling, demoralizing route. All for what? Completion? Kara was a passive observer. The player shaped them to be like this. It's not Kara's fault. It's the player justifying to themselves the choices that they've made because they would never do such horrible things, right? It's putting the blame on another identity so that the player doesn't have to deal with the consequences of what they've done. The consequences of being the person who did those horrible things. How familiar. I want to finish this up by being a bit pretentious. At the beginning of this video, I put a quote from The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, which seems odd. The whole thesis of this video has been explicitly about characters who aren't two different people in one body, so why did I choose Jekyll and Hyde, which are basically pop culture shorthand for this very phenomenon? Well, that's not exactly the case. If you haven't read the original story, Overly Sarcastic Productions did an excellent video summarizing it, so if you want to be caught up, then you can check that out. But the point is this. In the original story, Mr. Hyde was never a separate person from Dr. Jekyll. He was a separate identity. Through Victorian-era science fiction that was basically magic, Jekyll essentially made a potion that just made him look like a different person. Made him look like Mr. Hyde. And so he used the persona of Mr. Hyde to fulfill all of the morally dubious whims that he never could in his upstanding, socially respected Jekyll persona. It's another example of specifically creating another identity in order to shield yourself from the consequences of that identity. So my point with all of this is that evil twins are cool, split personalities are cool when they're not done offensively. But the most interesting stories about evil alter egos are the ones that reveal that on some level, we all have a curiosity and capacity for evil. A curiosity that causes us to act more without regard for consequences when our identity isn't tied to them. Like, say, an internet forum that allows users to anonymously spread heinous ideas without fear of persecution. Mr. Hyde doesn't exist, and he never did, but what does exist is the capacity within us all for evil. And isn't that just terrifying? I hope you enjoyed that video, and I sincerely hope I made your day just that little bit spookier. Special thanks to Pillar of Garbage and Mechanist Gamma for providing their voice talents for this video. Their channels are linked in the description. Feel free to like the video if you liked it, comment on the video if you had any thoughts or if you just wanted to say hi, and if you're feeling generous, subscribe to the channel and you can maybe see more of these types of videos being put out. It genuinely means a lot when people subscribe to the channel, and it gives me the motivation to do more videos like this. Check out the other videos that I make. I have a whole playlist of video essays like this one. Check out all the socials in the description. They're very cool, I think, and hope, maybe. I sincerely hope you guys all have a scarily good spooky season. And yeah, I guess I'll see you in the next video. Bye.
Gather all around me, little pickaninny boys. Ooh, ooh, don't you hear that scary? Can't you hear that scary noise? Listen to that awful moan, I guess you better.
He sounds like Dream, the loud guy outside my window.